Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video we'll be taking a look at the M50 Sherman. This is the first tank that you get in the independent tech tree in the Cold War game mode. It's a medium tank and it leads onto the Terran 4, so I'll be going over the stats of this tank. I'll show you my commander and equipment setup, and then I have two gameplays to show you how I try and play this tank to the best of my abilities and how I got through the grind, because a lot of people do find stock grinds very painful. Tanks that are bottom era or are lower era in World War II game mode, and I'll try and give you a few tips and tricks that might help you along your way during the grinds. But we're going to head over here to this spreadsheet and we're going to compare to the Centurion Mark II. This is a British era 1 medium tank for the Western Alliance. It is another starting tank, and I'll compare both of these tanks. I'll give you a rundown of how my commander and equipment setup affect the stats of the M50 Sherman, and then we'll get stuck into the two gameplays. There is one feature of this tank that kind of makes it redeemable in my eyes. Apart from that, it's extremely mediocre, but for a starting tank it isn't the worst thing I've ever played, and yeah, you should be able to get through it no problem. It's not too long of a grind. So first I'm going to run down the statistics compared to the Centurion Mark II. So in terms of hit points, when it's fully upgraded you get 1700 hit points, which is not too bad for a starting medium tank. That's 30 more than the Centurion Mark II. You have 465 meters view range, which is 5 meters more than the Centurion Mark II. In terms of its mobility, it does suffer in comparison to the Centurion. You have a 460 horsepower engine, a power to weight ratio of 13.13, which is extremely bad for a medium tank. Your forward speed is capped at 48.2 kilometers an hour, and your reverse speed is capped at 16.1 kilometers an hour. In terms of your traverse speeds, that's the kind of saving grace. In terms of its mobility, your whole traverse is 40 degrees a second, which isn't too bad for keeping up at things trying to circle you, and your turret traverse is 34 degrees a second, which is pretty poor, but you can boost that with sort of mobility equipment, and I'll go through my commander and equipment setup, and the highlighted bits in yellow are the updated stats with my commander and equipment setup, but we'll get to that in due course. So in terms of the gun, the M50 Sherman has a 75mm gun that deals 200 alpha damage on its standard and premium rounds and 320 alpha damage on its HE rounds. It fires APCR as standard and premium, and it also has an HE round as well. This is in comparison to the Centurion Mark II that has a 20-pounder gun that fires AP as standard, APDS as premium, and has an HE round as well for 230 alpha damage. So the standard APCR on the M50 Sherman has 1000 meters a second shell velocity, which isn't too bad for leading targets at mid to short ranges. It can struggle at extreme long ranges, and if you choose to boost your shell velocity up to 1125 meters a second with the premium APCR, you do have that extra shell velocity, and you also have extra penetration as well. And in terms of the HE, the shell velocity is pretty slow, as most HE rounds are, at 753 meters a second. In terms of the penetration then, for the 200 alpha damage and the 320, on the standard rounds it's 224, which is quite low, but you can make it work. On the premium APCR it's 248 millimeters of penetration, which is still quite low for premium rounds. And if you're firing at the front of heavily armoured tanks, you're going to have to aim for weak spots, or you're going to have to try and flank the enemy. And if you choose to fire HE, the penetration is extremely poor at 38 millimeters of penetration. It does give you 320 alpha damage, but it's extremely hard to penetrate 38 millimeters of penetration in Era 1 of Cold War unless you're firing at a really lightly armoured tank destroyer or light tank. As you can see here, in comparison to the Centurion Mark II, the Centurion Mark II has a worse shells velocity on its standard AP rounds, much better on its APDS rounds with much better penetration, 30 more alpha damage, and even more shell velocity on its HE. It's just 40 alpha damage less on the HE, but I really don't recommend carrying HE on either of these tanks, and if you do, maybe just 5 shells, but no more than that. And then we get onto the gun handling, and it isn't too bad for the M50 Sherman. You get a 1.9 second aim time, which is the same as the Centurion Mark II. The accuracy is pretty bad at 0.36, however you can get that to a good level with the fantastic commander skills that you have at your disposal, and I'll show you them in just a second. But now we get on to the main, I'll say selling point, but the main thing that you're going to want to take note of in the M50 Sherman is that when you are fully upgraded, this 75mm gun has a base DPM of 2,926, and this is much better than the Centurion Mark II's 2,300. And if we take a look at the DPM of all tanks in Era 1, I've highlighted the M50 Sherman here in green. You can see it's actually the 4th best DPM out of all tanks in Era 1, and if you want me to upload this document for everyone to download, then let me know in the comments. But you can see here that the only things better than it are the FV101 Scorpion that fires HE, and that means you have to penetrate the HE rounds, the PT-76, which is a pretty terrible tank all round anyway, and the M41A1 Walker Bulldog, and it's the 4th best DPM in Era 1. So that's what you're going to want to take advantage of, and it can't be easy all the time with the penetration, the shell velocity and the accuracy, but I'll try my best to make you aware of how I got it to work for me. So with that DPM, that means that you reload in 4.1 seconds for that 200 alpha damage, or 320 if you manage to penetrate the HE. You carry lots of rounds at 77 rounds of ammunition. For some reason I have a feeling I wrote that down wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's correct. And in terms of your gun depression and elevation, although it's red here and worse than the Centurion Mark II, it isn't too bad in terms of its gun depression at 8 degrees. That is workable. But the gun elevation of 12 degrees is pretty horrific, and you will be caught out if you're trying to shoot up and you're going downhill. You do have to be aware of that. So great DPM, okay aim time. You can get your DPM, your accuracy I should say, to a fairly reasonable level with a good commander and equipment setup. The penetration is pretty low for your standard and premium rounds, but you can make it work, and the shell velocity isn't too bad, and it's a good practice for leading your targets for when you get the Terran 4, because that has pretty poor shell velocity as well, and yeah, it's good practice for that. But all in all, poor mobility, fairly decent hit points. View range is okay, it's kind of non-applicable in terms of the true vision system for Era 1 anyway. For a starting tank, you're just going to want to try and get as many shots out as possible. You don't have any armor to sort of really note of. You might bounce the odd shell off of the front of your tank because it is sloped backwards. But now we'll get on to discuss my commander and equipment setup. So for the M50 Sherman, and the equipment that I run is Advanced Loader, Gun Stabilizer and Advanced Powertrain. And for my commander I run 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, Armour, Angling and Track Mechanic. In terms of the equipment then, Advanced Loader, I'm just trying to boost that DPM up as much as possible. Gun Stabilizer to get down that horrific accuracy, and Advanced Powertrain because the base engine power is horrific on the M50 Sherman, and anything that I can do to get this tank a little bit faster is a bonus. And with my commander, lots of gun handling skills, armor angling because eventually this will lead into heavy tanks, track mechanic because I want to get my trucks on faster, and 6th Sense, Born Leader and Rapid Loading is pretty standard on nearly every commander that I run in the game. So with the updated stats with my commander and equipment setup, I now have a 484 meters view range. My engine power has gone up to 483 horsepower. My power to weight's gone up to 13.79. I can now go 50.61 kilometers an hour forwards. I can now go backwards at 16.9 kilometers an hour, and my turret traverse has improved to 39.01 degrees, so 1 degree a second less than my hull traverse, which is pretty good for keeping up at tanks that are trying to circle you. And in terms of my gun handling and DPM, my aim time is now 1.82 seconds. My accuracy has shot down to 0.25. My DPM has gone up to 3,768, which is absolutely insane. And if you can make your shots count, then that can be devastating. You can keep people tracked, and it is fantastic. And now my base reload for that 200 alpha damage is 3.18 seconds. So that's it for the little look at the M50 Sherman and its statistics. We're going to head on now into the gameplay. So you're joining me here on Desfall in the M50 Sherman, and throughout the next two gameplays I'm going to do my best to explain how I like to get through the stock grinds, and in particular these bottom era tanks in the Cold War game mode, because let's face it, they're not the tank that everyone wants to get in the game. They're just a starting point, but there is usually one redeeming feature of every tank in the game, for most tanks in the game I would say, at least one thing that you can focus on. And in the case of the M50 Sherman, you do have a phenomenal DPM. You do have to make your gun handling work and that penetration work, but if you do, you can rack up some pretty nice damage totals. And with the reload on this gun, you can keep things tracked, get some nice assistance, and that's how I like to, or that's how I did try and boost the games in this tank, get that XP up as quick as possible to get to the next tank. Sometimes with these bottom era tanks, these stock tanks, it's a good idea to stick around for a few games after you have ground out the next tank, because they might be indicative of what's to come in the line. For instance, with the M50 Sherman, slow shell velocity on the rounds, gun depression that isn't fantastic until you get to the higher tiers. The Turan 4 hasn't got great gun depression as well. But for the most part, it's all about just choosing an aspect or a couple, focusing on them and trying to make them work, and supporting your friendly tanks. And like we're going to do now with this light tank, we're going to try and get as many shots into this M47 to help out this light tank. This M47 is just going for the PT-76, which is one of the worst tanks in the game, or one of the worst tanks in Cold War anyway. Unfortunately, the light tank was trying to get out of the way, went into a non-destructible wall, and I wasn't able to get a shot in for a few seconds there. Unfortunately, he died. We tried to get our DPM to work to keep him in the game, but we do manage to take out that M47 in the end, taking 1,000 damage for ourselves. We thank our friendly light tank there for the help, taking that M47 out. And now I'm just going to try and use this middle position to have a look out on the four corners of the map. You've seen me take this position in multiple gameplays, and it's a good position for sniping to the north, east, south and west. And also it's got opportunities for me to drop down either side, depending on if anything comes up, anything is trying to sort of snipe me from distance, or maybe a platoon come up and try and YOLO you, because that does happen in a hotly contested area like the centre here on Desfall. But for now, I'm just going to sit up here. I'm going to try and get shots in when tanks are distracted to use my DPM. That's the best way to make use of this tank, because you don't have the armour to bounce most rounds in Era 1 of Cold War with this tank. I'm going to take shots like I am doing now against this M46A1 when they're not looking, go for tracks where I can, and as you can see here, within quick succession, that's 3 shells, taking that one out, taking the M46A1 out, and we're up to 1735 assistance. And it's just about supporting your friendly tanks. You'll see in here I'm having a bit of trouble with the lead. Usually in Cold War I'm so used to having fantastic shell velocity, I don't lead as much as I would when I'm playing World War II game mode, so that's just something you have to get used to if you play both modes, but it does stand you in good stead for practicing your lead with slow shell velocity rounds for when you come up to play tanks like this, or when you play dirt guns, that kind of thing. So now we're just going to float around the centre really. There's nothing particularly special about the gameplay, it's just a solid support kind of gameplay. I'm just supporting tanks when they're not looking at me. I'm trying to keep my hit points intact, to stay covered whilst I am farming the enemy. I'm using my top tier tanks as kind of, not bait, but as a sort of distraction whilst I farm the sides and rear of the enemy tank. There's a medium come up behind me, which is the T44A, which, although is a really bottom tier tank, as in it's got a lot less hit points than me, a much worse gun and DPM, I still don't want to take any more shots because he is full health and I'm only on 1219 hit points. So I'm just going to keep him lit up for our team. I'm going to go up when possible, and hopefully I'll be joined by the medium, which is behind me. I'm going to advance up on this ridgeline here, keeping the hard cover in front of me, so hopefully he doesn't spot me. I'm going to try and keep an eye out around these buildings, using the third person camera angle to see where the T44A is looking, and then we're going to come in to the side. There's 2 of us coming in on, he can in on him now. He can only focus on one of us. Unfortunately, he does take out our M46A1, but we're just going to have to go in now and take him out, or get as many shots into him as possible. I carry the enhanced smoke screen there, as you can see. I pop that to get out of the way. I'm just going to reset, get back down here, and maybe draw him over the edge and bait him into fire from my friendly medium tanks that are behind me. And yeah, maybe I can catch him coming around this corner. Unfortunately, we get spotted coming up here, and that's probably a proximity detection from that T-44A, but we're just going to have to go in now. We're in a battle of DPM, and fortunately for us, that's going to always become a win for us if we can penetrate our shots, and if we are on roughly the same amount of hit points. That brings us to 4,094 direct damage, and it's just one light tank left on the enemy team, and it's all about trying to find the light tank and get our last shell into him. So for a starting tank, or for a bottom era tank, 4k damage isn't anything to sniff at, even in the Cold War game mode. I could have got more assistance from spotting out from that central position, and I was fortunate that there wasn't any platoons coming up to take me out. You just have to be mindful of that kind of thing. At the start of the battle, check your team list, check for platoons in powerful tanks like the FE-4211, T-95E3, and think where they might go. And then maybe a good idea is to follow your top sort of era tanks around, support them, and stick with your allies and platoon mates if you have them. But that's it for that game, where we actually finish in MVP in the M50 Sherman. We get 1,622 base experience points, 102,000 silver profit, 4 kills, and 4,094 damage. So that's it for the first replay. We're now going to head on into the second one. So we're now into this game here on Zanii, and we're going to take the M50 Sherman towards the castle area and see if we can get shots across towards the centre of the map and also into the castle itself. You can see here the poor mobility of the M50 Sherman. For a medium tank, it is extremely slow. However, if you do boost it with the advanced powertrain, you can get it to a level where you can almost keep up with the heavy tanks, get to a position where you can support your friendly tanks out. I guess that's one thing to note, is that although it's poor mobility, it does stop you from YOLOing, and it can give you a chance to assess the battlefield, look at the team list, that kind of thing, and decide on what position you can choose. So we're going to come up here on this ridgeline at the start of the battle, see if we can get any shots off at tanks that are crossing the north, and then we'll have to decide what to do with the rest of the battle and see if we can reassess our positioning. But for now, this is a good position to get sniping shots off at tanks that are crossing the north into the centre of the map. You'll see here that with the commander and equipment setup that I've chosen, the accuracy isn't too bad if I manage to aim the shots correctly enough. Sometimes it can feel a little bit derpy, but I think that's just because of the relatively slow shell velocity of this gun. It just means that sometimes you felt like you've led it enough. You're used to playing a lot of these Cold War tanks that have really fast shell velocity, and it can just throw off your aim a little bit. But if you play this tank for quite a few games on the trot, you get used to the lead and you can make the most out of this gun. You can see that once you do get your gun singing, if you have a target in front of you, you want to do everything you can to get as many shots into it as possible, because you definitely can't trade with this tank. Whereas with the tank destroyers that have the higher alpha damage, maybe a T100 or something like that, Charioteer, Object 268, FE4005, they can take a shot for a shot, they can win in a duel like that. Whereas for us, we have to put numerous shots into an opponent for every shot they put into us. So if we're going to be taking a shot, I'm going to try and make damn sure that I'm getting at least 2 or 3 shots into them for every shot they put into us to make it worth our while. and make sure our shots are counting and helping our team take the games down. Unfortunately, that T-44A there juked us. He just stopped. I thought he was going to reverse back. But we're just going to carry on firing from this position. We've got a nice bit of foliage and also hard cover in front of us, meaning that we're trying to keep hidden from any shells that are coming from that direction. There is a FE 4005 in the back there behind me, so I do have to be wary of that tank. That tank can one-shot me if he rolls really high, and you're seeing here that the penetration on these standard APCR rounds at this distance firing at that T95E3 isn't fantastic. We are penetrating sort of 60-70% of our rounds. We bounced maybe one or two at the start, but eventually they started to go in, and that's when you might want to carry the extra premium APCR. And that's where you can see me carrying quite a few premium APCR. It just makes the grind a lot easier, and you also still make a fairly decent profit even if you carry quite a few of the premium APCR, as long as you're running a premium account or you're not missing a lot of your shells. But for now, we're going to head over, go into the centre of the map, heading towards the north. I'm going to see if I can come over here and help this medium, this light, out to take out these tanks in front of me. There's an FE 4005, which is a one-shot, which I'd love to take out of the game because that's an extremely dangerous tank. Unfortunately now it's just that light tank left, and by the time I've got here with this poor mobility, I've made my decision, I've made my bed. I'm just going to have to lay in it, and I'm going to have to make use of this DPM. So we do get spotted, they know I'm here. I'm going to try and get as many shots into this M46 whilst also keeping an eye out to my right for when I get detected, or for when anything pops over the ridge, like the FE 4005. Fortunately, we just managed to get our gun round on time. We pop our smoke just to put off his aim should he try and snap us, and now we're going to use our DPM. And you can see here that on low or mid to low health targets, you really can put your gun to work. You can put numerous shots in to your enemies for every shot that they put into you, and you can take out numerous targets very, very quickly indeed with this DPM. And now that we're firing this premium APCR, it's not too much of an issue for us. We snap a shot there into the tracks of that Centurion 2, and now we turn around, we're reloaded again in that short succession, and we get a shot to finish off that M46A1. And that's the beauty of this DPM. You can take out tanks very, very quickly indeed. And now we're going to try and bait this T95E3, who is full health, over the ridge. I was hoping to just bait him enough to get shots into his tracks, which is what we're doing. And by doing this, we are either going to track him and get the assistance, or we're going to damage track him and get the assistance. So either one's a win-win for us, and we've managed to turn this narrow game into a win, and a lot of that is via the power of this DPM, and it's a staggering DPM, and it can catch people off guard, so make sure you use it. So that's another MVP finish for the M50 Sherman with a mastery badge there, with 1747 base experience points, 3 kills, 3,972 direct damage, 1,674 assistance, and even though we fired quite a few premium rounds, we make a profit of just shy of 80,000 silver. So I hope you've enjoyed this little review guide of the M50 Sherman. Good luck in your stock grinds. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.